I have a trampoline in my backyard, and one day I noticed that the grass was growing really well under the trampoline. And it got me thinking, why is the grass growing so well under here? It's not like they're getting any direct sunlight. They've been getting some shade from the trampoline, and there's a lot of shade in my backyard in general. So what's going on here? If you've ever looked under a trampoline, you'll notice that the grass is growing really well. There's lots of lush green grass and maybe even some weeds growing underneath trampolines. Now, if you think about it, this makes sense because trampolines are usually made out of some sort of plastic material that's impermeable to water. And when you jump on a trampoline, you're compacting that plastic into a waterproof barrier that prevents water from getting through. And water is essential for plants to grow. In fact, there's a really cool phenomenon known as the hydraulic conductivity of soil. And basically the idea is that when you compact soil, you reduce the amount of water that can flow through it. And that's why it's really hard to grow things underneath trampolines. But it also means that any water that does make it under your trampoline is going to stay there for a while. The reason I noticed this in my backyard is that we had a really dry winter and then an early spring. And so all of the snow that we had melted really quickly and the grass started growing right away. All of the grass under the trampoline was totally green and growing really well while all the grass around it was super brown and crispy. It was actually doing really well until recently. We've just had so much rain that it really washed out all of the growth that was happening. But anyway, my point is that trampolines are great for growing plants that like to grow in wet conditions, things like mushrooms. I have a whole video about how trampolines are great for growing mushrooms. But that got me thinking, why do other plants seem to thrive underneath trampolines? I mean, sure, there's a lot of great stuff in the urine that's good for plants, but surely it's not enough to sustain an entire ecosystem underneath a trampoline. In fact, I know that my grass isn't getting any nutrients from the urine, because I run my sprinklers on that part of the lawn to try and dilute the urine before it hits the grass. And so I started to wonder, is there something else that might explain why grass grows so well under trampolines? And then I remembered that there's another really cool phenomenon known as autotoxicity. Autotoxicity is basically when a plant produces a chemical that's toxic to itself. Now, this doesn't make a lot of sense at first. Why would a plant want to kill itself? But it turns out that this is a really effective way to prevent other plants from growing nearby. The idea is that a plant will produce a chemical that inhibits the growth of other plants, but it's not strong enough to kill the plant itself. So all the plants that are close enough to the source of the chemical will die, but the plants in the middle will live. There are lots of plants that do this. For example, black walnut trees produce a chemical called juglone, which is toxic to a lot of plants. That's why it's really hard to grow anything underneath a black walnut tree. A lot of people like to grow black walnut trees as a natural way to keep the vegetation down around their property line. And it turns out that grasses are also capable of producing these sorts of chemicals. One of the most well-studied examples is a grass called Festuca arundinacea, which is a perennial root. It's a type of grass that's often used in lawns and pastures because it's really hardy and drought-resistant. But it turns out that this grass also produces a chemical that inhibits the growth of other grasses. And so what this means is that if you have a patch of fescue in your lawn, over time, that patch will get bigger and bigger because the fescue is poisoning all the other grasses around it. And this could explain why I'm seeing so much grass growing under my trampoline. My lawn is mostly fescue, and the urine from the cats is killing off all the fescue around it, creating a little patch of unfertilized grass that's free to grow however it wants. Now, there's no way that this is the entire explanation. There's way more to it than that. But I think it's a pretty good hypothesis. And it would be really easy to test. You could put a bunch of different types of plants underneath a trampoline and see which ones grow the best. And then you could isolate the compounds in the urine and see which ones are responsible. Of course, I don't have the time or resources to do that. But someone out there should do that. If you're interested in testing this hypothesis, let me know in the comments below. I'll give you $100 to do it. And then we allow split the cost of publishing the results in a peer-reviewed journal. Deal.